I just want to talk to you a little bit about working with paper, but I use lots of newspapers because I travel to Australia and New Zealand to teach. I tend to stop in Dubai or Singapore, and you can usually get local newspapers with lots of different fonts and things on them, which make it very interesting. I've also have access to Japanese ledgers that are on beautiful rice paper, which I dye the pages or paint the pages, but even just ordinary old maps, local newspaper, packaging, you'll find all kinds of things. The insides of envelopes are quite interesting when they're printed, the utility envelopes. I'm just going to show you how I use paper with painted Bondaweb. Please notice that I'm working on small samples at the moment because it's important to start off small when you haven't worked with any particular process. Otherwise, you just get through so many supplies, it can become quite expensive while you're learning. I know I've said it before, but please just work small. You do not need to be working on huge pieces of fabric. So I've got my bits of scraps. This is a bit of old map. It's got a bit of an edge of a print on. This is just a piece of newspaper that I've painted something on, and that's what's left over. So as you can see, I probably don't actually throw much paper away or fabric. It can be a bit of a nightmare. I feel like a magpie. So these are just little scraps of torn paper that have been left from other projects, which are quite useful. This is a Japanese newspaper, and this is an Irish one. And I'm not sure where the map is. Oh, this is a map of Cornwall in the UK. So you can tear the paper. You'll find that paper will tear in a kind of nibbly way in one direction and then a straight way in another direction with normal industrially made paper. When you start to work with things like rice paper, then they can tear all over the place. You never quite know where they're going to tear, but it's quite fun finding out. So I'm using similar colors again, muted colors, so you can actually see everything. If I had that on a red and pink and orange background, it would be a bit more difficult to see. So I'm just going to iron these down. I tend to work in strips, as you probably noticed. The workshop, A New Starting Point, will really go into this process. I'm just showing you it as part of Bondaweb. As you'll probably understand, a lot of these processes do cross over. Obviously, because I'm working with them and I do all kinds of things. I like the raggedy edges rather than straight edges. So I'm just going to tear a very thin strip now. I'm going to move that one over and I'm going to tear another thin strip there. Now bear in mind, these will only stick where the Bondaweb is exposed, okay? So another piece of baking parchment with top next to the iron, and then you've ironed down your strips. Now obviously you could introduce paper to what I showed you just now. You could add paper to a piece of fabric that you've painted Bondaweb onto, but there are all sorts of ways of working. And then of course you can tear this up and then iron this onto something else, but that's in A New Starting Point. So have a look out for that in the workshop menu. Just to keep talking about working with paper, this would make a really nice background to stitch into now. I would work in the direction of the strips and I would work in a thread that is a similar color to the background. Again, because I don't like anything too jumpy, but that's just me. If you wanted to put red on there, that would be totally up to you, but I would probably choose a color in the work if it was me. But as I say, it's your course, you do what you like. So this is a layer of Japanese papers and painted Bondaweb. And then here we've got, take that bit underneath because that's a bit jazzy, that one. Here we've got an applique using papers. So the background here is some newspaper that I've used when I was painting some luchador. and the colour goes through to the newspaper underneath when you're painting Luchador, and you end up with some rather nice paper. So rather than throw it away, I use it as backgrounds. So because the background is quite jazzy and quite lively, I've just used another piece of newspaper that's painted brown, and I've cut a hair shape out. No, I didn't. So I applied some brown paper onto some plain white Bondaweb to create a paper applique, which I then ironed onto the background. And because this is a silhouette, you can see the hair and you can also see the background. So if I use this kind of jazzy color for this hair, you wouldn't really able to see one or the other. And then just to give it a little bit of definition, I've backstitched around the hair. I do use a lot of hairs in my work because we have lots of hairs in the field in front of the house. So this is Harry Hare. And then another piece with just layers and layers of different colored papers, which is lovely. And again, you could stitch into this. Obviously this has no foil or any decoration at all. This is just newspaper. And if you want to stitch into newspaper, a good thing to do is to iron it onto a soft dressmaking interfacing, which gives it enough support when you're hand stitching and machine stitching, so you don't get big holes in your work, because paper can tear quite easily if you stitch it by hand or on the machine. Let me show you some other samples that you might find useful. This is a rectangle of plain white Bondaweb, not been painted, that's been ironed onto a piece of black fabric. I've waited for it to cool down. I've peeled the backing paper off. Then I've flat foiled with the flat of the iron the entire surface of the Bondaweb, like I showed you at the first part of this workshop when I showed you how to flat foil the hearts on the t-shirt. This is the same process. So it's just a square of Bondaweb foiled with gold foil, and it makes a fantastic background to print onto. You can also cut your unpainted Bondaweb into strips, iron them down, or into any shapes you like. I just happened to use strips because it was easier. And then on the unpainted Bondaweb, I've ironed on some gilding flake. You can just see the little irregular areas of metallic colours. And then in the space that was left exposed of the Bondaweb, I just foiled the whole thing with the flat of the iron. And wherever the Bondaweb was exposed, it picked up the gold foil. And then I did it with the silver foil. So there are various ways of working with the Bondaweb. And then you can probably just see there's some very fine, irregular herringbone stitch. This is one of my favorite samples. It's been around a very long time. This is probably about 15 years old, this sample. But I just love it. I don't know if it's because, I think it's because the colors work so well, and it's got the little flashes of gilding flake coming through, and it's got a turquoise transfer foil on it. I suppose it's because it's all my favorite colors. It's a little bit of gold, a bit of turquoise, a little bit of silver. And it works really nicely. And I do love this raggedy torn effect that was created. You never quite know what effect you're going to get when you iron down Bondaweb, but this negative space here is almost like a crack in a wall. It works really nicely, and I love it so much. I've never actually wanted to stitch into it. Bondaweb can be quite beautiful by itself. This is various layers and layers on top of each other of painted Bondaweb. You can see various little strips of colour, but because they're all reasonably close together colour-wise, they're not too shouty. And again, this is one that I've never really wanted to put foil or skeleton leaves on or anything. At some stage, I think I'm just going to stitch across, maybe in this kind of colourway, in very thin threads, and then just keep building up. Until you start to work with Bondaweb, you never quite know what you're going to do with it. It's quite lovely. Here's another one of my favourites. This was a kind of pale white turquoise mixed together with some silver, little flash of pink, with some silver and gold mica flakes, a little bit of silver glitter just shining there. And then you can see some of my fine herringbone stitch. You don't have to do this stitch, it's just something that I do, but I do irregular stitches. The stitches are parallel, but the lengths of the stitch are different, because I'm not particularly keen on recognized embroidery stitches because they all look the same, and I like my work to tone in. So you'll see that this is a reasonably turquoise thread which picks up the color of this turquoise here, and I think it works really well as one piece. This is another favorite piece, a little bit more color this time, but not too overdone with color. And I've used old bits of printed Bondaweb and bits of scraps of fabric, all kinds of things on this. And there's quite a lot of my herringbone stitch. There's quite a few little bits of polyester organza on here as well. It's quite a long piece. I think I might actually frame this one and actually hang it in the house. Here's a piece again on some white or cotton organdy, and this was layers of painted Bondaweb and then layers of paper with a few little mica flakes in here, a few little stripes of gold foil here, and then again you can see my random herringbone stitch. As luck would have it, I found a thread that was variegated in these colors in the work, so I actually used that to stitch with. And I think you can just see there, if the camera focuses, yeah, you can see the variegated thread, which is exactly the same colors as in the work. It was just one of those things that happened. I didn't actually plan it, and I find that the best pieces of work usually start that way. So you don't need to stitch into your work, but I do find that these surfaces are very tempting to stitch into. See what you can do. Pop some photographs into the chat group.